Welcome to the World War II newspaper channel where we read the Chicago Tribune one day at a time, going through World War II as it happened through the eyes of those who lived it. If you enjoy content like this, please subscribe to this channel and click on the bell icon to get notifications when a new upload is going to premiere. And also, if you want to hear the actual newsmakers, go check out my other channel, the companion channel to this one, the World War II Old Time Radio channel. There we have vintage broadcasts, including newscasts, speeches, old movies, and music. And subscribe to that channel and click on the bell icon. Now for the newspaper. News as read from the Chicago Tribune for Tuesday, January 21st, 1941. Henry Chop reporting. The weather today. The sun rose at 7:12 a.m. It set at 4:51 p.m. For Chicago and vicinity, increasing cloudiness and warmer on Tuesday, light rain Tuesday night and Wednesday, somewhat colder Wednesday, gentle to moderate southeast winds on Tuesday. The low temperature 18 degrees, the high temperature 30. Today's headline, Launch State Scandal Quiz. Springfield, Illinois, January 20th. Attorney General George F. Barrett disclosed today that he intends to begin immediately a thorough investigation of charges and complaints of law violators made against the Stell and Horner state administrations. 8 new department heads appointed by Governor Dwight H. Green last week officially entered upon their duties this morning. To all of them, Barrett sent letters of congratulations telling them to call on the Attorney General's office for help anytime it is needed, offering his assistance in the examination of records of preceding department heads and asking for cooperation in his own inquiry. Barrett sent a copy of this letter to Governor Green for his information and also addressed to State Treasurer Warren Wright and State Auditor Arthur C. Luder letters much the same as those he wrote the department directors. The Attorney General wrote to each of the cabinet members, "As this is the day on which you are taking office, permit me to extend my sincere congratulations and at the same time assure you that the services of the Attorney General's office are yours whenever you feel that they are needed. It is already apparent that there is an abundant cause for inquiry into many phases of the state's business during recent years, and it is highly probable that matters of this character may arise in your department. In that event, I shall be ready to give you every possible assistance in a legal way, and at the same time, I am inviting..." And now for world news. Cairo, Egypt, January 20th. British desert fighters have driven into the Italian Etruria at 2 points along the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan and are continuing their advance in contact with the fleeing fascists, the British Middle East Command announced today. With the Italian fight from the Sudan reported to be general all along a 200-mile front, the British command said its forces were hard on the heels of Mussolini's men east of the Etrurian towns of Tessenai and Sabdarat, where fortified fascist positions were captured without a struggle. Sabdarat is on the south-central Sudan-Eritrean border about 20 miles east of Kassala. Sudan outposts wrestled from the Italians yesterday by the British with the aid of Ethiopian irregulars. Tessenai, a railhead and port of the Gash River, is some 30 miles southeast of Kassala and several miles inside Eritrea. Authoritative military circles in London said 2 Italian divisions, including 2 black shirt battalions, had been routed in operations around Kassala, which had been held by the fascists since last July. Italian casualties were placed at 2,000. The British eastward advance may be aimed at driving straight across Eritrea and Missoua, Red Sea ports some 200 miles from the Sudan frontier, and cutting the Italian colony in 2 at its approximate middle. The ground operations were preceded by heavy RAF assaults on Italian positions about Tessenai and Massawa. Attacking pilots said numerous fires were started. In Libya, where a British assault on Tobruk is expected shortly, there was nothing to report, the communique said. British mobile units driving on Italians in Kenya were declared to be steadily gaining ground and inflicting casualties on the enemy. On the lower end of the East African front, the British campaign to throw the Italians out of Ethiopia resulted in a series of lively patrol clashes in which South African forces put the fascists to flight. A British communique issued at Nairobi, Kenya, said a number of Italians and a quantity of equipment were captured and 9 killed, including 2 officers in a clash on the Kenya-Western Ethiopia border in the El Yibo area. A spirited patrol encounter occurred on the Kenya-Italian-Somaliland border near El Wak, but the British said the Italians fled so fast they captured only 1 prisoner. Valletta, Malta, January 20th. 19 Axis warplanes were shot down during yesterday's heavy raids on this British Mediterranean fortress, 11 by British fighter planes and 8 by anti-aircraft guns, the British said tonight. This was a declared total of 39 German and Italian losses for 3 days. In addition, 3 other Axis planes probably were destroyed and 9 damaged, the British account said, while only 3 British aircraft were lost, with the pilots of 2 reported safe. In Rome, the Italians announced that German dive bombers sank a merchant ship in the harbor of Valletta, Malta on Sunday during an attack in which the crippled British aircraft carrier Illustrious was hit for a 3rd time. German and Italian planes escorting the dive bomber shot down 6 British planes, a communique said, adding that 4 German bombers and 1 Italian fighter plane failed to return. Stefani, Italian news agency, recapitulating the German-Italian attack on a British convoy in the Mediterranean January 9th through 11th, said the 31,000-ton British battleship Malaya was so badly damaged it had to be docked at Gibraltar for repairs. Athens, January 20th. British fighter planes shot down 1 Italian bomber, damaged another, and drove off the remainder of 2 raiding formations in a dogfight nearly 2 miles above Athens today in the full view of thousands of jubilant Athenians. Some of the spectators were killed or wounded by the Italian bombs. Shortly after noon, Italian raiders appeared for an attack on Piraeus port of Athens, some 5 miles away. They came first in a formation of 4 and were met by an anti-aircraft barrage. By the time the next formation of 5 Italian bombers arrived, British fighters had risen to meet them. Soon 1 Italian plane was falling, smoke trailing from its fuselage. Civilians watching it danced and shouted in the streets. A Greek communique later reported 1 Italian bomber came down near the island of Fleves and another west of Cape Sunium. 4 members of the crew of 1 bomber bailed out. Most of the bombs fell harmlessly into the harbor and shipping facilities escaped damage. A small number of houses were wrecked. A British bomber was lost when it caught fire after overshooting the landing field on return from the battle. Despite continuous bad weather, the Greek army was reported to have intensified its attack north of Klissura on the central front, preceded its raid with a heavy artillery bombardment of the Italian-held positions. Then the infantry stormed the Italian lines, breaking through in some sectors, dispatches reported. Bombay, India, January 20th. 4,000 Italian prisoners captured by the British in the Egyptian-Libyan desert arrived here today. The first batch of captured fascists, including 4 generals, reached Bombay New Year's Day. Belgrade, Yugoslavia, January 20th. Reports that a German general staff officer had been shot dead in Bucharest deepened Balkan anxiety tonight as military observers agreed that a so-called Nazi expeditionary force of about 200,000 men was ready to move south, east, or west at a moment's notice. The slain officer was identified in dispatches to Belgrade newspapers as a Major Doring. A former Greek professional boxer of Greek origin was reported arrested. Bucharest police, these reports said, quoted the prisoner as saying he quarreled with the officer in a cafe, followed him to the hotel Ambassador, and fired 5 shots into him. A hint of Nazi military readiness was seen in a diplomatic report from Bucharest that the Nazi command had requested the Romanian telephone company to allot special lines immediately to Sofia and Athens. All telephone connection between Yugoslavia and Romania has been severed, and Romania is reported to have ordered that no Greeks leave. Headquarters for 8 German divisions were reported to have been established in Transylvania near the Yugoslav frontier, in Moldavia near the Russian frontier, in Olthenia across the Danube River from Bulgaria, and in Romania's oil fields. Numerous anti-aircraft units also are stationed in Romania. By the end of the month, observers believe the Nazis' Romanian army will total about 300,000 men. Sofia, Bulgaria, January 21st. Many casualties among civilians, German soldiers, and Romanian Iron Guardists as a result of bombings in the streets of Bucharest were reported early today in a diplomatic dispatch from the Romanian capital. There was no immediate confirmation of the reported fighting since Bucharest could not be reached by telephone. Berlin, January 21st. General George Petrovichescu has resigned as Romania's Minister of Interior, DNB official German news agency reported today in a dispatch from Bucharest. DNB said the military commander of Bucharest, General Dumitru Popescu, would succeed General Petrovichescu. London, January 20th. The Battle of Britain slacked off today to spasmodic one-plane German forays in which the British said there were no casualties and only slight damage. This was the only aerial activity. There were no reports of British Air Force offensives, and thick weather over the English Channel apparently handicapped both sides. British planes were in the air on the defense, however, and were said to have severely damaged an air raider near the east coast of Scotland. 5 German bombers were reported officially to have been shot down last night during Nazi raids, 4 of them by anti-aircraft fire. The Home Security Ministry announced that 3,793 British civilians were killed and 5,044 injured and hospitalized in air raids last month. These compared with 4,588 dead and 6,202 injured in November, and brought the total from last June 18th to December 31st to 23,081 dead and 32,296 injured. Berlin, January 20th. An 8,000-ton merchant ship and convoy was hit directly by a bomb in the course of German armed reconnaissance 15 miles off Harwich, England, the High Command communique said today. Boston, Massachusetts, January 20th. A British mystery ship, seamen termed it one of the neatest jobs since the outbreak of the war, was described today by crewmen of the American freighter Minnesotan from South African ports. The boat was a converted passenger and cargo liner, they said, was cleverly camouflaged and heavily armed, and apparently was capable of great speed. They said the mystery vessel, similar but far ahead of the boats of the World War, lay at anchor in the harbor of one of their African ports of call. Saigon, French Indochina, January 20th. Admiral Thibault declared tonight that the French Asiatic Squadron had destroyed the main force of the Thai Navy in a surprise attack in the Gulf of Siam before dawn, January 17th. French officers hinted that Japanese naval instructors training the Thai Navy might have a part in the fighting. An inspection of the ships participating in the battle revealed not a scratch. The cruiser Le Mot Pequet needed only minor repairs to damage caused by constant firing. Tokyo, January 21st. The British consulate today advised British subjects who have no important reason for remaining in Japan to leave before the impending crisis in American-Japanese relations come to a head. British nationals were advised sailings of all ships likely would be canceled in event of a crisis. No new instructions were issued to U.S. citizens who recently were advised to return home. Berlin, January 20th. The curtain of secrecy, which was clamped down before the meeting between Adolf Hitler and Premier Benito Mussolini, was slightly raised this afternoon. The bare fact that the meeting took place in the presence of Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop of Germany and Concalazio Ciano of Italy was allowed to become known. It was followed by the customary assurances about the spirit of friendship united the two chiefs of government and the close fighting alliance between German and Italian peoples, and the equally customary assurance that full agreement prevailed in the views of both parties in all questions. The headline of tomorrow's Völkischer Beobachter says, "The Duce called on the Führer." Therefore, one may assume that the meeting took place in German territory. Despite the official secrecy, German newspapers predicted a major offensive by the Axis as one result of the parley. The fight against England will be carried out decisively and jointly by Germany and Italy to make a new Europe, said the Allgemeine Zeitung. Regardless of where the fight takes place, regardless of what operations and powers share in it, it will be a joint victory. England must be patient for other conference details until Germany and Italy consider it suitable to open the door to the waiting room, the Zeitung remarked. From present examples, it appears doubtful if England will learn what she wished to learn. None of the editorials indicated where the Axis chiefs intended to strike, and official sources declined to talk about Hitler's meeting with Mussolini. Italian sources in Rome indicated that the outcome of the conference would be German and Italian concentration on beating the British in the Mediterranean war arena. Virginio Gaeta, editorial spokesman of fascism, mentioned a coalition of Axis forces to stem British successes. Malta, the British base, was suggested in dispatches from Rome as probably being the number one objective. Gaeta insisted that attempts to bomb Valletta, Malta's key port, and reinforced Axis efforts in Libya and against Greece do not mean abandonment of a plan to attack Britain herself. The Germans in recent months repeatedly had complained that their Italian allies were not as careful as the Nazis in the art of withholding news. Only secrecy can ensure lightning-like thrusts, Nazis maintained, while the Italians occasionally are less systematic in creating the elements of surprise. The secrecy provided for the meeting of the two chiefs of state may have unduly magnified its importance, some observers suggested, since on former occasions the Germans and Italians stressed that it is natural that allies should meet more frequently when fighting side by side. This morning, automobiles of diplomats could be seen dashing back and forth in Berlin. Those diplomats who could wangle a meeting with officials of the Foreign Office made the fullest use of their chances. When they returned to their offices, their less lucky or less prominent colleagues sought to learn what they had heard. Montreal, Quebec, January 20th. The United States-Canada Joint Permanent Defense Board assembled today for its first meeting here, one of a series of conferences since it was organized several months ago. Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia of New York, United States co-chairman Lieutenant General Stanley D. Embick, and Colonel J.T. Bissell of the United States Army, Captain Harry W. Hill and Commander F.P. Sherman of the United States Navy, and John D. Hickerson, Assistant Chief of the European Division, State Department, were present. Paris, January 15th via Berlin delayed. This item is being sent from Paris because it is believed here that the vigorous French censorship has not allowed it to go out of Vichy. Under the headline, A Franco-American Incident at Vichy, the Paris press today carried the following news story, the text being identical in all papers. A Franco-American incident occurred at Vichy at the Ambassador Hotel during the night of December 31st. At midnight, when the diplomats present were exchanging good wishes for the new year, some Americans played the British national hymn on a gramophone. A captain of the French army protested against this unseemly demonstration. The military attaché of the United States, Mr. Shaw, asked the French captain to step out with him for an explanation. The captain had barely left the room when the American attaché treacherously gave him a punch on the jaw, which knocked him down. The French government, informed of this incident, lodged a protest with the American embassy. It is hoped that this extraordinary diplomat will be requested to leave France and to exercise his pugilistic talents somewhere else. Questioned by the Tribune, the official spokesman for the American Embassy in Paris said the newspaper item was the first news he had had of any such incident. The correct name of the American in question, he said, was Major Robert A. Schow, Schow, as opposed to Shaw, as was mentioned earlier in this story, former assistant military attaché in Paris and now acting American military attaché in Vichy following the departure of Colonel Horace Fuller. After telephoning the American Embassy in Vichy, the American Embassy in Paris declared that nothing was known of the incident mentioned in today's Paris press, nor of any protest made by the French government. This statement was called a flat lie by a semi-official spokesman with the French government services in Paris. He ridiculed this correspondent's suggestion that the Americans might have been playing America, which has the same tune as God Save the King. Vichy, France, January 20th. Apart from the misery that is the lot of most of the French 7 months after the armistice, everyone complains of boredom. Living here, too, is reduced to the 18th century level in many respects. In the morning, one drinks a brew called coffee, but it is made of tomato seeds, beans, wheat, barley, and other ingredients. There is no milk, no sugar, no butter, but one gets a piece of dry bread. Everyone's preoccupation of whatever class is about food and employment. René Belin, Minister of Labor and Industrial Production, recently announced that unemployment had been cut by 350,000, but hundreds of thousands are still jobless. Not long after they have finished their so-called coffee, most persons go marketing. Early in the morning in all towns and villages, long lines of women and men carrying baskets may be seen, first waiting for streetcars and buses and then waiting in other lines to be served. It is the same in the open-air markets, stores, and shops. They represent all sections of society. Comic and tragic scenes may be witnessed in these food lines. Sometimes after waiting for 2 hours at the end of the line, the shoppers find that everything has been sold out. Sometimes there are quarrels with some other persons accusing others of trying to slip into advanced places in the line. One source of controversy is the priority cards, which are given to expectant mothers, parents of large families, and the aged. Sometimes fights occur when a priority card is shown. It is alleged that some women use their cards to buy up good stuff that they do not use but sell at retail to persons who do not like to stand in line. It is related that women have disguised themselves skillfully by the use of cushions as expectant mothers and, being caught, have suffered pulled hair and torn clothes at the hands of indignant neighbors. Prices are high and getting higher. At the markets, one pays $1 a pound for chickens and fowl and nearly as much for beef. Eggs cost about 5 cents each. Vegetables and salads have practically disappeared. Oranges and fruit cost about 20 cents a pound. When carrots, potatoes, and other fresh things appear, they are carefully rationed. After their purchases have been made, the shoppers have to fight again for transportation to get home, and this often means standing in line for 2 hours. Once home, there is the fuel problem. Each household is allotted 100 pounds of coal monthly. This furnishes hardly enough for cooking and leaves the heating problem unsettled. In some towns like Lyons, gas is rationed and cannot be used between 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. and between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. The problem of food at restaurants is becoming more precarious. Dozens of eating places are being closed. In Lyons and Marseilles, a la carte service is blamed and only fixed menus may be served. Crow soup is advertised in many of Lyons' eating places. The faculties of invention are being strained to produce substitutes and adulterations. Saccharin is universally used instead of sugar, but a new product in the form of grape syrup is being put out to sweeten coffee and cakes. It looks something like honey. Municipal authorities try to keep strict control of prices with varying success. An attempt is also made to control food producers. No farmer or peasant may kill a pig, sheep, or beef without notifying an authority. He must also turn in ration tickets covering the weight of the animal killed if it is for his own consumption. No pig weighing 180 pounds may be killed. Amusements are few. Dancing is still banned, but I read today that the police had raided a place at Puy de Dôme where a clandestine dancing establishment was being operated. Vichy, France, January 20th. Pierre-Étienne Flandin, Chief of State Henry Philippe Pétain's foreign minister, today called in the foreign press and announced that from now on, the censorship in unoccupied France will be practically discontinued, and the press control operated along the lines of that in Germany. Correspondents, Flandin said, may send without censorship anything except references disrespectful to Marshal Pétain or compromising the safety of the state. The French government, however, will expel correspondents who send inaccurate and untrue reports, said Flandin. The idea is to put the writers on their own responsibility, according to Flandin. Paris, January 16th, via Berlin delayed. A dispatch from Abbeville appearing in the Nouveau Temps today reported that half the population of that town had disappeared in a strange suicidal wave. It said that many persons had thrown themselves into the Saône River or had disappeared without leaving any trace. The dispatch said that autopsies on some of the recovered bodies revealed blows on the head which indicated murder. Abbeville is in the German army zone and barred to normal traffic. It has been impossible to find out whether the reported murders and disappearances were continuing. And now for national news. Washington, D.C., January 20th. The first third-term president in United States history conducted himself with a cool assurance during the inaugural ceremonies today. Before 12,000 persons massed on yellow wood seats on Capitol Hill, Franklin D. Roosevelt swore for the third time to defend and protect the Constitution to the best of his ability. The voice of Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes was vibrant with emotion as he administered the oath, but Mr. Roosevelt was calm. An estimated 125,000 persons gathered behind the police lines to catch a glimpse of the ceremony. The president repeated after Justice Hughes the following words: I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. So help you God, intoned the Chief Justice. So help me God, repeated the president. Chief Justice Hughes then extended his hands, and the crowd cheered. The oath taken by Wallace was as followed. I, Henry A. Wallace, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter, so help me God. The president was again late as he had been in 1936, and the nation was without a chief executive for 11 minutes, the office having expired at 12 o'clock noon, 11 a.m. Chicago time. Henry A. Wallace was sworn in as vice president at 12:07 p.m., and for a few fleeting moments was the country's leader. John Nance Garner, the retiring vice president, read the oath to Mr. Wallace and caused some surprise by embracing his successor afterwards. Both men laughed heartily and grinned for the benefit of the newsreel cameras. The entire ceremonies were characterized by informality. Chief Justice Hughes seemed to be one of the few officials present conversant with the solemnity of the precedent-breaking proceedings. Justice Hughes, according to Washington rumors, plans to resign shortly. Extraordinary precautions were taken to protect Mr. Roosevelt from possible harm. The largest police and military guard ever assembled on Capitol Hill was present. 500 Marines with fixed bayonets assisted District of Columbia Police, Capitol Police, Secret Service men, Federal Bureau of Investigation men, and out-of-town constabulary in preserving order. Every doorway, niche, and window near the inaugural stand was guarded by a soldier. This gave to the ceremony a distinctly military flavor, which was augmented by 235 Army and Navy planes flying overhead. The day was cold but sunny. The temperature was 28, the air sparkling. The audience was pro-Roosevelt and applauded his speech generously. It was a happy day for the president, and he demonstrated his pleasure in the tones of his voice. A benediction was pronounced after the president finished speaking by Monsignor Michael J. Reddy, General Secretary of the National Catholic Welfare Conference. He prayed that the president would be given the wisdom and courage and be inspired to persevere in promoting justice and in hating inequity. Mr. Roosevelt then waved his top hat to the crowd. Mrs. Roosevelt, standing nearby, beamed. The band played the Star-Spangled Banner. The president shook hands with Hughes and Garner, then left the stand as the band struck up The Stars and Stripes Forever. James Roosevelt, the president's eldest son, returned to the stand, picked up the pages of Mr. Roosevelt's address, and placed them in a black briefcase. Diplomats from Germany, Japan, and Italy attended the inauguration. They sat together toward the rear of the diplomatic corps section. 56 countries in all were represented by their ambassadors, ministers, or charge d'affaires. Washington, D.C., January 20th. 4 generations of Roosevelts were happy over the first third-term inauguration in history, but the most beaming faces in the entire clan were those of the President and Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt. Oldest of the family is Mrs. Sarah Roosevelt, the president's mother, vigorous at 86 years, who became the first woman to see and hear her son take a third-term oath. She is one of 3 mothers who have seen their sons become president. The mothers of James A. Garfield and William B. McKinley were the others. The youngest of the family present was 4.5-year-old Elliott Roosevelt Jr., son of the second son of the president. Between these age extremes were the president's children and grandchildren and a tribe of cousins, aunts, uncles, and more distant kinfolk. Inaugural day opened officially for Mr. and Mrs. Roosevelt when they and the president's mother drove from the White House for a morning prayer service at St. John's Episcopal Church. The 15-minute service in the Church of Presidents was simple, in keeping with Mr. Roosevelt's wishes. He bowed his head at the prayer. Grant us grace fearlessly to contend against evil and to make no peace with oppression. The president wore traditional morning costume, a cutaway coat, and striped trousers. Mrs. Roosevelt wore a dress of Americana red, her familiar long black broad-tail coat, and a red hat trimmed with a pair of white imitation birds. The president waved to crowds gathered at the church and about the White House. As the president got into his car for the ride to the Capitol, his dog Fala, a black Scotty, jumped in beside him. "Sorry, old man," Mr. Roosevelt said, "but this time you can't go along." Mrs. Roosevelt rode with her brother G. Hall Roosevelt to the Capitol. The president rode with Speaker Sam Rayburn and Senate Majority Leader Alvin W. Barkley. 4 Army trucks carrying machine guns flanked his advance on the Capitol. The martial aspect of these cars was lost when it was discovered that they were carrying newsreel and still photographers and radio announcers dressed in Army uniforms. On the way back to the White House from the Capitol, Mr. Roosevelt shared the hour of his greatest triumph with Mrs. Roosevelt. He rode in an open car. His silk hat was off all of the mile between the Capitol and the White House, and acknowledging cheers of the crowd which braved the cold wind. Mrs. Roosevelt smiled to the crowd. In the White House, they separated. Mrs. Roosevelt played hostess to 1,200 guests at an inaugural buffet luncheon. The president lunched with his mother and his uncle, Frederick Delano, in the Red Room. From time to time, the more important dignitaries among the luncheon guests were guided into the Red Room for a word with the chief executive. After the luncheon, Mrs. Roosevelt accompanied the president to the reviewing stand. Following the parade, she joined him in receiving some 5,000 guests for tea. The president received governors and members of the Electoral College. Mrs. Roosevelt, assisted by Mrs. Wallace, welcomed all other guests. Washington, D.C., January 20th. Numerous officials and political organizations from Middle Western states accounted for a large portion of the vast throng at the inauguration ceremonies today. The greatest number of visiting delegations were from Illinois, a survey showed, with Wisconsin, Indiana, Iowa, and Michigan each well represented at the gathering. The Illinois contingent was headed by Secretary of State Edward J. Hughes, official representative of Governor Dwight Green. Hughes filled the added role of being the top-ranking visiting Democrat from the state, having been the only member of his party to survive the Republican landslide in the election last November. Also in attendance were Corporation Counsel Barnett Hodes, City Collector Louis Rixman, United States Attorney J. Albert Wohl, all of Chicago, and United States Attorney Howard Doyle and Judge Roy Adair from downstate. There was a large Polish-American delegation from Cook County, which filled an entire special train on the trip to Washington. Chairman of this group was Alderman Joseph P. Rostenkowski, 32nd Ward, Chicago. Every Polish-American Democratic organization in the county was said to be represented. Senator Waylon Brooks, newly elected Republican from Illinois, was among the early arrivals at the Capitol. The Wisconsin delegations, which began arriving late last week, were headed by the Republican Governor Julius P. Heil, accompanied by his official staff. Among the latter were Adjutant General Ralph Emmel and Colonel Maurice Coakley. On the other side, politically, were Mrs. George N. Given of Milwaukee, Democratic National Committee woman, and Attorney William Rubin, also of Milwaukee, who has been mentioned as Wisconsin's next Democratic committeeman. Governor Henry F. Schricker led a large Democratic contingent from Indiana. Iowa Democracy was led by Frank J. Comfort of Des Moines, state chairman, and Mrs. Mary Kelleher of Fort Dodge, Democratic National Committee woman. The Michigan groups were headed by Governor M.D. Van Wagener. Washington, D.C., January 20th. In the presence of the nation's dignitaries, the envoys of other nations, and a vast assemblage of the citizenry, President Roosevelt today dedicated his third term of office to the defense of America, the cradle of modern democracy, from what he described as the menace of foreign dictatorships. He uttered this high resolve in his inaugural address delivered on the East Portico of the Capitol immediately after he took the oath of office for the third time at 12:11 p.m., 11:11 a.m. Chicago time. In the face of great perils never before encountered, Mr. Roosevelt declaimed, our strong purpose is to protect and to perpetuate the integrity of democracy. For this, we muster the spirit of America and the faith of America. We do not retreat. We are not content to stand still. As Americans, we go forward in the service of our country by the will of God. With a flood of sunshine warming the wintry air, it was the most radiant inauguration day in decades. The occasion formally signalized the repeal of the unwritten law limiting the presidential tenure to 2 terms as the first third-term president was ushered into office. All around the president were seated the senators and representatives who believe our democracy is more immediately imperiled by the conditions at home than by the totalitarians abroad, and who are moving to deny him the dictatorial powers he is asking in his bill to lend and lease armament to the foes of the Rome, Berlin, Tokyo axis. Mr. Roosevelt, however, was apparently oblivious of that situation as he visualized 3 great tasks in our history: the creation of the nation in Washington's time, the preservation of the nation from disruption from within in Lincoln's time, and the salvation of that nation from disruption from without in Franklin D. Roosevelt's time. With evident reference to Mrs. Anne Murrow Lindbergh's theory of social revolution in Europe, the president rejected the view that for some unexplained reason, tyranny and slavery have become the surging wave of the future, and that freedom is an ebbing tide. The title of Mrs. Lindbergh's book, setting forth her ideas, is The Wave of the Future. Mr. Roosevelt was convinced of the error of Mrs. Lindbergh's view when he surveyed the recovery of the nation from the fatalistic terror that possessed it when he took the oath of office the first time and beheld the reforms accomplished under his administration, all without sacrifice of democracy, he said. Though he failed to give the credit to the Congress that rejected his scheme to pack the Supreme Court, Mr. Roosevelt pridefully said that these reforms were accomplished within the 3-way framework of the Constitution. The Bill of Rights remains inviolate. Elections are still free, he said, and the prophets of the doom of the American democracy have been confounded. No, he proclaimed, democracy is not dying. Great progress has been made under his administration, the president said, toward realizing the hopes of the republic, which cannot forever tolerate either undeserved poverty or self serving wealth. But there is still a long distance to go in clothing and feeding the body and informing the mind of the nation. Mr. Roosevelt found justification of his program aimed at the totalitarian powers in the words of George Washington that the mission of America is the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the Republican model of government. Democratic leaders and the interventionists generally lauded the inaugural address as a great utterance. Non-interventionists were critical. London, January 20th. The British press used solemn superlatives today to hail the inaugural address of President Roosevelt, which was heard in millions of homes just after blackout time. Radio reception was excellent. The Times said the speech was one of the most impressive and successful broadcasts from America ever heard in this country. The Telegraph said President Roosevelt's third inaugural address will become historic as a decisive declaration of the American spirit in a time when the far future of mankind is being determined. The voice from Washington has now pronounced the doom of ultimate failure on all the power of Nazism. The News Chronicle said Roosevelt, month by month and year by year, has carried his countrymen along with him in the greatest campaign of political education that any national leader has ever undertaken. His message will be heard above the tramp of Nazi boots and the boastful clamor of tyrants. Hearing the president's confident words, above the din of battle, we felt we could almost see the flame of liberty leap high. Never in the history of the inauguration of an American president attracted so much attention here. The British Broadcasting Corporation not only picked up the full text of the speech by shortwave, but even interrupted its sacred 6 o'clock news program to do so. The speech was heard and read probably by more people on the islands than almost any other the president has made. There was no official comment. After having examined the speech, the Foreign Office decided it was on too lofty a general plane to plane. Will do so at a later time. Washington, D.C., January 20th. Royalty in the person of Crown Prince Olaf and Crown Princess Martha of Norway witnessed the third inauguration of President Roosevelt as his guests. The royal couple in exile because of their country being overrun by German troops are living in nearby Maryland. They were placed on the president's platform amid members of the president's family and a few official intimates, such as White House Secretary Stephen Early and Miss Margaret Leland, the president's personal secretary. The couple first met the president when they were guests at his family home at Hyde Park, New York, during a visit to the United States in 1938. They also have been White House guests. Buenos Aires, January 20th. Leading newspapers throughout South America hailed President Roosevelt's inauguration for a third term today as of the utmost significance in history, describing him as the undisputed leader of democracy and free people in the struggle, which is to decide whether the democratic way of life is to continue. South American newspapers said in editorials that the continuance of democracy in their own countries depends on the success or failure of President Roosevelt's leadership in the United States during the term beginning today. Rome, January 20th. Political circles said they regarded President Roosevelt's inaugural address as a restatement of what Italians consider to be his hostility toward totalitarian regimes. Washington, D.C., January 20th. The inaugural parade dedicated to national defense was the shortest in the nation's history, although it presented a considerable section of the nation's armed might. The parade, which came about 2 hours after the inauguration proper, passed the stand where President Roosevelt stood in exactly 45 minutes. In that period, 5,589 persons, 235 airplanes, and 477 vehicles passed in review. Although the nation is in the seventh month of an $18 billion rearmament program, many of the planes and vehicles were of types considered obsolete. Only a few of the 235 airplanes were of a type considered fit for use in modern warfare. Tanks, combat cars, reconnaissance cars, artillery, and other motorized equipment were not, for the most part, of the type on order for the new Army, but polished vehicles which have been in use for years. Mr. Roosevelt, clad in a dark fur-lined overcoat with a beaver collar, which apparently had been borrowed from Joseph Davies, former ambassador to Russia and inaugural chairman, took his place in the reviewing stand before the White House at 1:36 p.m. Chicago time. Planes roared overhead in formation. The Army was represented by 36 Flying Fortress bombers, 54 twin-engine bombers, and 108 pursuit ships. The Navy sent 18 silver-hued fighters and 19 light bombers from the aircraft carriers Wasp and Ranger. Motorcycle units opened the parade. Behind them came 2 combat cars and a troop of Negro cavalry escorting General George C. Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, who was Grand Marshal of the parade. Marshall dismounted and took his place at the president's right. Admiral Harold R. Stark, Chief of Naval Operations, stood at the president's left. Vice President Henry A. Wallace joined the president as the parade got underway. The Army band marched by to the tune of Hail to the Chief. It was followed by automobiles bearing state representatives to the Innaugural. Detachments of West Point cadets, Annapolis midshipmen, and cadets of the Coast Guard Academy filed by in perfect alignment, which drew a tribute from the stands on the line of parade. Units of regulars, Marines, Guardsmen, draftees, sailors, and Coast Guardsmen marched by in admirable formation in the line of march. The Marine band struck up Semper Fidelis, and the Navy band the rousing Anchors Aweigh. The parade included a detachment of red and blue shirted National Youth Administration marchers, Civilian Conservation Corps youths, and Works Progress Administration units. The mechanized units roared by at a speed of about 35 miles an hour. They consisted of a reinforced battalion of the 1st Armored Division brought here from Fort Knox, Kentucky. The battalion of light tanks powered by gasoline and diesel motors was followed by a company of heavy tanks. Sprinkled in the units were combat and reconnaissance cars. Scarcely one of the vehicles were of the latest type, although the unit in the parade was composed of a considerable portion of the nation's armored force. 1 battery of 75mm guns and 1 battery of 155mm howitzers was in the reinforced battalion. Both guns are of World War manufacture, but with new carriages. The parade did not have a single 105mm gun, which is the new standard field piece of the Army, or of the new 155mm weapons. Other artillery included 37mm anti-tank guns, 37mm anti-aircraft guns, and 3-inch anti-aircraft guns. The newer 90mm anti-aircraft gun was not represented. The parade ended with a miscellany of motorized equipment, searchlights, pontoons, tractors, half-track vehicles, and the like. A final line of motorcycle policemen passed by the reviewing stand at 2:21 p.m. Chicago time. New York, January 20th. Within a month, American workmen will begin chopping down the stunted cedar trees, oleander, and hibiscus shrubs on a horseshoe-shaped group of islands at the eastern end of Bermuda. The thud of the axe will announce the start of construction on the new American defense base. At Bermuda, the United States will forge a link in its forthcoming chain of fortresses stretching from Newfoundland to South America. Leases on the British colonial property were obtained in the deal involving the sending of 50 overage destroyers to England. During a recent trip to Bermuda, this correspondent cruised around the area where the modern sea and air base will be carved out of the coral islands and reef-strewn waters. Plans were discussed with Major Donald G. White of the Army Engineer Corps in charge of the project and other officials on the site. It is expected the job will take at least 2 years to complete, and the cost will run into many millions of dollars. How many millions, the Army engineers will not say. Construction will be more difficult than originally planned because the area finally leased to the United States was the second choice of our military authorities. First choice of the United States Board of Inspection, headed by Rear Admiral J.W. Greenslade, called for a slice of Warwick and Southampton parishes in the exclusive Riddles Bay neighborhood and a number of islands in Great Sound at the western end of the colony. 1/13 of Bermuda's total area of 19 square miles was asked. There were a number of natural advantages on the Riddles Bay location. Leveling for the Army landing field would have been comparatively simple and inexpensive, with only a small amount of filling in required. Great Sound afforded plenty of deep water anchorages for the largest of Uncle Sam's fleet units, and the harbor is ideally sheltered for seaplane operations. However, a howl went up from the Bermudians. They said their island paradise would be sliced in half, which would jolly well ruin their principal means of livelihood, the tourist trade, and the American colony. 1,500 persons would be thrown out of their homes. Powder magazines would be located a mile and a half from Hamilton, the colonial capital city. Airplanes would disturb the sleep of the populace. A committee hot-footed it to Washington, D.C. last fall to lay the protest before the late Lord Lothian, British ambassador. The Americans withdrew their request and accepted the second site. Negotiations are still going forward for seaplane facilities in the island of Great Sound, and the USS Bowditch, a naval hydrographic ship, is making soundings in that body of water. Nassau, Bahamas, January 20th. It was rumored here today the United States may establish a base at Hawk's Nest at the south end of Grand Turk Island instead of Mayaguana Island. Grand Turk is geographically in the Bahamas but is part of the Jamaica Protectorate. San Juan, Puerto Rico, January 20th. A full stomach is man's only defense, as Sabio Marino, local representative of the International Longshoremen's Association, said today. Marino has called out 1,500 dock workers at Ponce Maquez and San Juan for more pay. Los Angeles, California, January 20th. America's newest aircraft factory today began to function at suburban Burbank. As the administrative personnel of the Vega Airplane Company subsidiary of the Lockheed Aircraft Corporation moved into the $3,500,000 quarters adjacent to Union Air Terminal, the announcement was made that the Vega Ventura bomber, advanced version of the Lockheed Hudson, would test fly in several weeks. Employment at the Vega plant is now 4,000 and will reach 15,000 when the new factory gets into full production, Cortland S. Gross, president, said. San Francisco, California, January 20th. The 3rd Battalion, 30th Infantry, United States Regular Army showed the 3rd Division Commander Major General C.F. Thompson how they would invade a foreign nation by making an attack on San Francisco's Presidio from the sea. The maneuver was part of the Army's new training schedule and had a precedent in a similar attack last year when several thousand troops came here in transports from their division base in Camp Lewis, Washington. Today, the transport was simulated by the perpendicular wall built on the end of a pier. Rope ladders and swings were used to get the men and equipment off the simulated ship. First came the riflemen armed with Garand semi-automatic rifles, bayonets, and Browning automatic rifles. A platoon of 30 caliber machine gunners came next, followed by the 50 caliber machine guns. New York, January 20th. The Navy will buy the Southern Pacific Line's 440-foot freight and passenger ship Dixie, the line announced today. Built in 1928, the ship has been operated between New York and New Orleans. So that she may be rebuilt for Navy service, the Dixie will be withdrawn from her run after arriving in New York on February 26th. Washington, D.C., January 20th. Reliable sources on Capitol Hill today said the State Department will reject legislative demands that the department make public the diplomatic reports of Joseph P. Kennedy and William C. Bullitt. Kennedy, who will retire shortly as ambassador to Great Britain, and Bullitt, former ambassador to France, were said recently by Senator Burton K. Wheeler, Democrat, Montana, to have disagreed sharply on the course the United States should pursue in the European war. Wheeler demanded that the State Department make public reports received from the two diplomats prior to the European war. He said that if it was inadvisable to publish the reports, they at least should be presented to the Senate and House Foreign Affairs committees in connection with their study of the president's legislation to lend or lease American-made war equipment to Britain. One well-informed legislator told reporters that the State Department will decline to release the reports even to congressional committees on the ground that they are confidential documents of the executive branch of the government. This informant said administration officials believe publication of the documents would shed little light on the Lend-Lease legislation and might create an unnecessary side issue in the current fight over the program. Kennedy, who questioned the necessity of some provisions of the administration plan in an address Saturday night, is scheduled to testify before the House Foreign Affairs Committee tomorrow. Later in the week, Colonel Charles A. Lindbergh and General Hugh S. Johnson will take the stand. Representative Hamilton Fish, Republican New York, ranking minority member of the Foreign Affairs Group, said today that opposition witnesses definitely will answer the absurd charges made by government officials that we are in danger of immediate invasion and that this bill was something to do with a crisis in England in 60 to 90 days. Fish declared it absurd to talk of aiding Britain in a period of 60 to 90 days because none of the equipment leased or loaned to the British would reach them during that period. On the Senate side, there were reports today that opposition members were seeking to draft a substitute for the Lend-Lease legislation, which would provide an outright cash gift to Britain of between $1 billion and $2 billion. Washington, D.C., January 20th. A central figure in the inaugural scene here 8 years ago, John N. Garner, slipped quietly into retirement while third-term New Dealers were at the height of smashing the third-term precedent. When Garner, now 72 years old, and his wife, Eddie, boarded a mid-afternoon train for their home in Uvalde, Texas, the book was closed on a public career of 44 years, the last 38 in the nation's capital. Garner served 15 terms, 30 years in the House of Representatives, and 8 years as vice president. Only 3 members of the House have exceeded his record. He also was a Texas county judge for 2 years and a state senator for 4 years. Garner's last official act today was to administer the oath of office to Henry A. Wallace, his successor, whom he congratulated. Then, after attending the swearing-in of President Roosevelt, he returned to the hotel suite, which had been his Washington home for the last 8 years, met Mrs. Garner, and took a taxicab to the station. Famed for his love of a simple life, Garner declined inaugural invitations, which would have taken him amidst the sound and fury of the third-term celebrants. His departure was as unobtrusive today as was his arrival in 1903 when he and Mrs. Garner rode in a hack to Mrs. Lily List's select boarding house on K Street. Garner left the Capitol cheerful as usual and without rancor over his defeat in fighting against the principle of the third term. He explained that he had decided 10 or 15 years ago to free himself of hatred and envy of his fellow men, and that he had pretty well kept that promise to himself. Going to the White House, he said at the train, would have been like going to jail for 4 years. I'd rather go back to Texas and take things easy. If I had to do all over again, I'd have stayed in the House. I didn't ever ask to be vice president. If I had stayed in the House, I would have been Speaker 10 years longer than any man in history. Late today, the Senate unanimously passed a resolution of appreciation for the fairness, impartiality, and ability shown by Garner during his 8 years as presiding officer. It was the release of Garner delegates in the Democratic Convention of 1932, which broke a deadlock and brought about the nomination of Franklin D. Roosevelt for president. Garner supported the president again in 1936, but early in 1937 rose to great stature when he helped to kill Roosevelt's scheme to pack the Supreme Court. Garner's leadership of the fight within the Democratic Party against the third-term nomination made him an early possibility for the preference and further widened the gulf between him and the president. Well-informed political observers said that if Roosevelt had cultivated Garner, who knew every trick in Congress, instead of those with whom he surrounded himself, he probably never would have suffered a defeat in Congress. Garner, during his years in the House, rarely introduced a bill, but he knew how to push one through despite the fact that his party was in the minority during most of his service. The friendship between Garner and the late Nicholas Longworth, Republican Speaker from 1925 to 1930, is a Washington classic. That was during the Prohibition period when a small group of senators met frequently to play poker for considerable stakes. During that period, Garner coined two phrases which still live in the Capitol. When he took a drink of whiskey, he struck a blow for liberty, and he chased it with branch water from the tap. Garner looked upon one who used other chasers or who drank cocktails as a man who would ride side saddle. Washington, D.C., January 20th. The Supreme Court held today that passage of the 1940 federal law requiring registration of aliens invalidated a 1939 Pennsylvania alien registration statute. Justice Black delivered the opinion which upheld Justice Department contentions that the regulation of alien registration is exclusively the concern of the federal government. Justice Stone wrote a dissenting opinion in which Chief Justice Hughes and Justice McReynolds concurred. Assuming as the court holds that Congress could constitutionally set up an exclusive registration system for aliens, I think it has not done so and that it is not the province of the courts to do that which Congress has failed to do. Justice Stone said, "It is difficult to overstate the importance of safeguarding against such diminution of state power by vague inferences as to what Congress might have intended if it had considered the matter." Nashville, Tennessee, January 20th. Bills proposing a tax of 3% on the gross receipts of every newspaper, periodical, and radio station in Tennessee were introduced in the Senate today. The bills bore the signatures of 16 senators, 5 of whom admitted that they did not know the intent of the measures. The bills were introduced by Senator Damon Heaton, a former Game and Fish Commissioner who was fired from office in 1936 by Governor Hill McAllister after newspapers charged he was incompetent and inefficient. Senator J.R. Hickerson, Governor Prentice Cooper's floor leader and a signer of the bills, said they were not administration measures. He admitted that Cooper's educational appropriations bill, tabled last week, was $1 million short of the state's need and said the tax on the press and radio earmarked for elementary and high schools would supply the $1 million. San Francisco, California, January 20th. 2 young Navy men on leave from a psychopathic ward were convicted today of ripping a Nazi flag from its staff at the German consulate here. The incident occurred Saturday as some 2,000 persons ultimately gasped and cheered at the reckless adventure 9 floors above the street. The two, Harold J. Sturdivant, 19 years old, of Haverhill, Massachusetts, and Irvin G. Lackey, 20, of Charlotte, North Carolina, will be sentenced Thursday by Municipal Judge Peter J. Mullins, who convicted them of a malicious mischief charge. They had waived trial by jury and pleaded innocent. In court, however, each admitted his part in the escapade, an incident over which the United States government has given Germany a written expression of regret and which Berlin has called scandalous. Judge Mullins told the two this is an offense against another nation. He said he considered the slashing and ripping of the Nazi emblem the act of youth in all its recklessness, prompted by bravado and the wish to be a hero in the eyes of the crowd. The maximum sentence possible under the charge is 6 months in city prison. Meanwhile, the youths are in custody of naval authorities. Both said they did not know that the office from which the flag was flying was the German consulate. Sturdivant said he now realized that the act was not to the best interest of the United States government. The Navy confirmed a report that both men have been under observation in the psychopathic ward of Mare Island Naval Hospital. Each has about a month to serve of his Navy enlistment. On liberty from the hospital, they wore civilian clothing when they were engaged in Saturday's escapade. Los Angeles, California, January 20th. After deliberating nearly 4 days, a jury in federal Judge Leon R. Yankwich's court today disagreed as to the guilt or innocence of Mrs. Edna Ballard, her son Donald, and 4 others of the inner circle of the I Am cult. The jury acquitted the three The jury acquitted the three remaining defendants. My copy was flawed there. All were charged with mail fraud. Those acquitted are Charles Sindelar, noted painter, his wife Pearl Sindelar, and Frank von der Hoya, a member of the I Am staff. In addition to Mrs. Ballard and Donald, the jury was unable to reach an agreement as to Betty Mundy, Louise Majerus, William J. Kasser, and Paul Stickle. Judge Yankwich indicated that, barring a government move for dismissal, he would set a new trial date next month. We have not decided, said United States Attorney William Fleet Palmer, whether to retry Mrs. Ballard and the other defendants. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, January 20th. Alfred Reeves, manager of the New York Automobile Show for the last 25 years today, assured Automotive Trade Association managers in session here that there will be 1942 model automobiles, but that there will not be a New York show. The managers are affiliated with the National Automobile Dealers Association, whose convention opens tomorrow. Reeves explained the new models would be brought out to care for different associations which might decide to hold automobile shows. He said he understood the San Francisco Association already had decided to stage a show. Evansville, Indiana, January 20th. Katharine Hepburn, stage and screen actress, changed hotels here today when part of the employees of the McCurdy, where she first registered, went on strike for wage increases and vacations with pay. Ms. Hepburn appeared here tonight in the Philadelphia story. And now for local and regional news. Induction of Chicago draftees under the January selective service quota will be cut short on January 28th because of continued delay in the construction of training camps to which the draftees are to be sent, state draft officials revealed yesterday. Because of this delay, Illinois will furnish only 3,008 men in January instead of the original quota of 4,739 draftees for the month. Colonel Clay Donner, chief of the Manpower Division of the State Draft Board, said last night that the deficiency for the month will be added to the February quota, which has not been announced. The February induction period probably will begin on the 10th of the month and will continue through the 28th, he said. Stoppage of January inductions will leave 45 of the 180 Cook County draft boards with unfilled January quotas, Colonel Donner explained. Once before this month, from January 9th to the 16th, inductions were halted because of the lack of accommodations at training camps. A Chicago contracting firm yesterday received a $1,300,000 subcontract for construction work at the Elwood Ordnance Works near Joliet. Several other Chicago companies received national defense orders from the government. The Elwood contract was let to Midwest Construction Company Chicago by Sanderson and Porter, the engineering firm which is building the shell loading plant for the government. The contract covers construction of a group of igloo-type semi-underground magazines for storage of explosives. Sanderson and Porter at the same time announced award of a $500,000 order to Wisconsin Structural Steel Company. Up to yesterday, $15 million of contracts for materials for the Elwood project and the adjacent Kankakee Ordnance Works, which is a TNT plant, had been let. Stone and Webster Engineering Company is the general contractor for the TNT plant. The War Department announced the following Chicago companies had received contracts. Markley Clothing Company, $5,000 wool service coats, $21,250. Union Twist Drill Company, drills and countersinks, $1,108. And E.G. Ryan and Company, presses, $6,200. Another Chicago company, the Automatic Transportation Division of Yale and Town Manufacturing Company, received a Navy order for $13,310 of tilting trucks. A judgment giving title to 170 acres of Will County land to the federal government was entered yesterday by federal judge William H. Hawley. The land will be used as part of the sites for the Elwood and Kankakee ordnance plants. For the 165 acres owned by the Will County Forest Preserve District, $30,000 was awarded. Arthur States of Will County got $500 for 5 acres he owned. 50 women volunteers today will carry on the work of passing out $100,000 anti-war handbills, which was started yesterday by 6 Northwestern University students. The Chicago chapter of the America First Committee is sponsoring the distribution to awaken the people to the necessity for immediate action. The America First Committee will not be satisfied with modification of the War and Dictatorship Bill, but demands defeat of the entire measure, according to the handbills. Excerpts are as follows. Are you willing to give up democracy? Do you want to go to war without being asked? Are you ready to make the United States a dictatorship? Then speak up now. A war dictatorship bill has been introduced in Congress. The president would have absolute power to do these things without consulting Congress or the people. Cancel the Neutrality Act and send our warships and merchant vessels into the war zones. Take us into the war whenever, wherever, and against whomever he chooses. Give away our Navy to any nation. Give away every gun and bullet in our Army to any nation. Give away every American airplane to any nation. Give away all our military secrets to any nation. Telegraph, telephone, or write to Senator Scott W. Lucas and Senator C. Waylon Brooks at the Senate Office Building. Also to your congressmen. Also to your congressman, also to Senator Walter F. George, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Tell them you are opposed to the war dictatorship bill, that you want them to fight and vote against it, that you won't stand for compromises, that the whole bill must be killed and thrown out of the Capitol. Make a list of all your friends and get them to do the same. Do it immediately. The appellate court yesterday remanded 6 election fraud cases to the county court for new trials under another judge. The court held that Edmund K. Jarecki, who tried the cases, was not qualified to do so because he was a candidate in the April 12, 1938 primary and consequently had an interest in the outcome of the cases. The 6 cases involved alleged frauds on the part of 20 judges and clerks of election who received sentences ranging from $500 fines to 2 years in prison. The ruling of appellate judges David F. Matchett and William H. McShirley and John M. O'Connor in a case involving alleged frauds in the 58th precinct of the 24th Ward was typical of those in all the cases. The record of this case discloses an unusual novel situation, the ruling read. The alleged acts of misbehavior directly affected his, meaning Judge Jarecki's, candidacy. It was charged that the defendants, as officials, acquiesced in the conduct of persons who erased the crosses on ballots in the square before the name of the trial judge and made crosses in the square opposite the name of his opponent. It is manifest that the trial judge was intensely interested in alleged actions. There was no reason why the cases should not have been tried by another judge. We hold that the record shows that he, meaning Judge Jarecki, was disqualified. In this case, Mrs. Margaret Cunningham and Edward Feinberg, Democratic judges, received sentences of 6 months each. Benjamin Pollard, Republican judge, was sentenced to 1 year, and Arthur Frisch, Democratic clerk, and William Ebert, Republican clerk, were sentenced to 3 months each. Indianapolis, Indiana, January 20th. Republican leaders tonight decided to ask a legislative investigation of the charge that aliens voted in Lake County in the November 5th election. The Republican State Committee, Legislative Steering Committee, and state candidates voted to recommend that a committee of the legislature look into evidence brought to light by Virgil E. Whitaker of Hammond, former judge. Whitaker, a Republican, defeated for Lake County prosecutor in the November election last week, petitioned the Indiana General Assembly for a contest of Democratic Governor Henry F. Schricker's election. Schricker was declared winner over Glenn R. Hillis, Kokomo Republican, by 3,963 votes. The Republican group, holding the second of a series of Monday night meetings scheduled through the General Assembly's 61-day session, adopted unanimously the subcommittee's report containing the recommendation that the legislature investigate alien voting, said Committee Secretary Neil D. McCollum. McCollum said the report was adopted on motion of Ralph F. Gates of Columbia City, 4th District Chairman and head of the subcommittee. Two of the bandits who took part in the $9,174 Chicago Tribune payroll robbery last July 19th, in which a Tribune guard was wounded, were sentenced to 1 year to life in the penitentiary yesterday after they pleaded guilty of robbery before Judge Julius H. Minor in the criminal court. The two are Peter Allegretti and Tony Lulo, each 32 years old. Lulo is an ex-convict. Neo Rizzo, alias Ritz, 29, who pointed out the Tribune money card to the bandits but did not take part in the actual robbery, was found guilty of larceny in a bench trial and was sentenced to 1 to 10 years in prison. The fourth member of the gang, Walter J. Smith, 26, a gasoline station owner, turned state's evidence and pleaded guilty. He was placed on probation for 2 years. Emmett Moynihan, assistant state's attorney, agreeing to the sentence. Before pronouncing sentence, Judge Minor said the robbery and shooting of Harry P. Walsh, chief of the Tribune Guards, was one of the most flagrant and daring crimes in Chicago's history. It resembled a Wild West shooting, the judge said. Had one of the bullets proved fatal, these men would now be on trial for murder instead of robbery. The courts have no patience with gunmen of this type who menace the lives of citizens. They are potential killers and belong in the penitentiary. A material aid in the capture of the bandits was a reward of $10,000 offered by the Tribune immediately after the shooting. The reward was offered for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the robbers. The money will be distributed soon. Walsh, who is 60 years old and lives at 7823 Cornell Avenue, limped to the witness stand leaning on a cane and testified he had spent 10 weeks in Henriton Hospital recovering from his wounds. He told of emptying his gun at the robbers and identified Allegretti as one of the bandits. 6 witnesses who were in the vicinity of Illinois and St. Clair Streets where the shooting occurred identified one or more of the 3 participants. James Wortham of 3259 Flournoy Street, a tuck pointer who was working on a building at the intersection, said that approximately 15 shots were fired. Wortham testified that after Walsh had been critically wounded with his trigger finger shot off, Lulo returned again and fired at the guard. Under questioning by prosecutor Moynihan, Smith told the story of the robbery and of the preparations which the gang made for it. He said Rizzo watched the Tribune car several days and learned the route it took from the Lakeshore Trust and Savings Bank to the Tribune Tower. He said that on the day of the robbery, he drove Lulo and Allegretti to St. Clair Street and Grand Avenue and parked in an alley near the bank. In a few minutes, Rizzo came to Smith and said the Tribune car driven by James Dubenik, 5523 Loomis Street, had left the bank. Rizzo then left the scene. Smith said he drove his car in front of the Tribune car and stopped in Illinois Street near St. Clair Street, forcing the Tribune car to halt. He said Lulo and Allegretti closed in on foot from each side of the street, firing at Walsh. Smith told of getting out of his car and firing 2 shots into the back of the Tribune car. Dubenik, who was unarmed, was not wounded. Smith said that after the robbery, he, Lulo, and Allegretti drove to a garage in Cicero and divided the loot. He said they gave between $800 and $900 to Lulo, who gave to Rizzo, but Rizzo later said he received only $300 from Lulo. On July 20th, the day after the robbery, Smith and Allegretti returned to the garage for their guns and dumped them into the drainage canal, Smith said. Judge Minor commended prosecutor Moynihan, Captain Daniel Gilbert, chief investigator for State's Attorney Thomas J. Courtney, Captain Thomas Harrison of the Chicago Avenue Station, and the witnesses for their parts in obtaining the convictions. He also praised Walsh and Dubenik for their attempts to halt the robbery. Charges of assault to kill against the defendants were dismissed, as were charges of robbery and assault to kill against Allegretti in connection with the robbery August 2nd of Hurley Machine Company, 2115 South 54th Avenue, Cicero. Lulo, the ex-convict, served 7 months in the federal penitentiary in Sandstone, Minnesota for white slavery. The case of Hugh Greer Carruthers, head of the neological New Logic Foundation, who is on trial before Judge Joseph A. Graber in the criminal court on a charge of raping a 12-year-old girl, is expected to be given to the jury this afternoon. The defense rested yesterday after Carruthers and 8 character witnesses testified in his defense. Carruthers, who describes himself as an ex-priest of the Kumbum Lamasery in Tibet, went on trial last week. He denied the rape accusation yesterday and charged it was blackmail. He engaged in several tilts with Samuel Friedman, assistant state's attorney, when Friedman asked him to give his real name and age. Carruthers said he remembered back 70 years, but declined to give his baptismal name. He said he had been sentenced to prison for robbery in 1921 in New York under the name of Carter Borum. Two bandits who masked their faces with handkerchiefs broke up a pinochle game last night in the home of Lewis Ellis at 109 South Central Avenue and took $2,337 in jewelry and clothing and $174 in cash. The bandits previously appeared at the home of Joseph Ginsburg, 5558 Congress Street, bondsman, and one of the card players on the pretense of securing a bond. Ginsburg's son Harold directed them to find his father at Ellis's home and then telephoned his father to expect them. When Ginsburg let them into Ellis's home, the men produced revolvers and announced it was a robbery. From Ellis and his wife Martha, the bandits took $1,662 in jewelry and clothing and $75. The other players robbed were Abe Belaski, 5437 Montrose Street, jewelry valued at $580 and $57. Harry Steinberg, 1219 South Independence Boulevard, $35 ring and $22. And Ginsburg, a $60 watch and $20. The victims were forced to stand facing a wall in the living room. Ginsburg told policemen Arthur Marks and James Beaver that he saved two $100 bills by dropping them to the floor and kicking them under a couch. New two-way radio equipment installed Friday by the fire department was used for the first time yesterday morning when a fire destroyed the interior of a 2 1/2 story Church of God, 4338 Prairie Avenue, and was used again later when fire swept the Hotel Silby, 500 North Clark, a 4-story brick building. Anthony Milani, first deputy fire marshal, estimated damage to the church at $25,000 and to the hotel and a tavern on the first floor there at $5,000. Causes of both fires were undetermined. Firemen found Mrs. Anna L. Spagel, widow of a policeman, overcome by smoke on a stairway in the hotel. She was revived. Several other persons were assisted to safety. Michigan City, Indiana, January 20th. A 34-year-old mother gave birth here today to Indiana's first quadruplets, but within 7 hours, all of the children were dead. The mother, Mrs. Ava M. Swanson, wife of Melbert O. Swanson, 32, a foundry clerk, was reported to be doing well. The quadruplets, 3 girls and a boy, were born at 9:30 a.m. after Dr. Russell A. Gilmore had performed a cesarean operation. The babies weighed 9 pounds and a quarter ounce in all. The mother herself normally weighs only 98 pounds and is but 4 feet 11 inches tall. All 4 babies were given names as they were born. The order of births follow: Jennifer, 2 pounds 5.5 ounces; Stephen, 2 pounds 7.5 ounces; Phoebe, 2 pounds 1 3/4 ounces; and Linda, 2 pounds 1 1/2 ounces. Phoebe, the weakest, died at 11:15 a.m., Jennifer at 1:45 p.m., Linda at 4:05 p.m., and the boy at 4:10 p.m. Quadruplet births occur only once in 658,503 confinements. It is seldom that all 4 survive. Chicago medical authorities estimated that only about a dozen quadruplets survive in the United States. An Aurora manufacturer was killed last night when his automobile was struck at 55th Street and Central Park Avenue by a Grand Trunk Line train carrying 125 Chicago draftees to Fort Custer, Michigan. The victim was John Benson, 72 years old, 449 Downers Place, Aurora, owner of the Benson Manufacturing Company, makers of steel products. John A. Youngsburg, 73 of 42 North Ohio Street, Aurora, died in St. Charles Hospital of injuries incurred Saturday when he was hit near his home by an auto driven by Earl L. Little, 535 New York Street, Aurora. Daniel Herlihy, 75 of 6031 South Mason Avenue, a former tavern keeper, died in County Hospital. He was hit by a car driven by Ben Hadley, 6158 Massasoit Avenue on January 12th. The accident occurred at Mason Avenue and 63rd Street. Up to 4 p.m. yesterday, 56 persons had been killed in Cook County traffic since January 1st. Of these, 40 died in Chicago, where 1,238 were injured during the same period. The CIO Farm Equipment Workers Organizing Committee yesterday called a strike at another plant of the International Harvester Company when employee members walked out of the Rock Falls, Illinois works and formed a picket line. With about 150 of the plant's 250 employees taking part in the strike, operations at the plant soon were brought to a standstill. It was said that none of the members of the plant's Employees Association, the independent bargaining agency, participated in the strike. The Rock Falls plant manufactures coil springs for other harvester plants, turning out trucks, tractors, and farm implements. Company officials said that a shutdown of this plant might endanger steady production of about $10 million in defense orders, in addition to curtailing work on the company's regular line of production. 134 persons took final oaths of citizenship yesterday in the federal court of Judge William J. Campbell. The first official indication that transportation priorities are being considered despite the repeated assurances of railroads that they can handle any traffic problem was given yesterday by Douglas C. McKeechee, assistant to Donald M. Nelson. Nelson is director of the Division of Purchases of the Office of Production Management, the new defense super agency. McKinney spoke at the 34th Annual Convention of the National Canners Association in the Stevens Hotel. The organization is one of the largest of more than 20 connected with the food industry, which are conducting sessions in Chicago this week for thousands of delegates. Outlining the functions of the three main operating divisions of the Office of Production Management, production priorities, and purchases, McKeechee declared the task of the priorities division will become an increasingly hard one as the defense program progresses. Decisions will probably have to be made giving right of way to certain raw materials and on subassemblies. This is to assure our defense forces that they will get what they need. The stockpile program to provide an adequate supply of raw materials at all times will continue to operate. A continuous flow of raw materials must be kept moving to the factories. This may mean transportation priorities. Chicago will become one of the three centers in the United States for the purchase of canned food for the Army beginning July 1st, Lieutenant Colonel Paul P. Logan told the Canners. He is chairman of the Food Committee of the Army and Navy Munitions Board. And now for sports. Wisconsin's basketball team won its fourth straight Big Ten basketball game last night when it triumphed over the University of Chicago 44-37 before 3,000 in the Midway Fieldhouse. It was the third conference setback for the Maroons in as many games. Wisconsin led at the half 26-21. Jane England, Badger center, though removed from the game on personal fouls early in the second half, was the game's high scorer with 17 points on 6 field goals and 5 free throws. Ted Strain, also of Wisconsin, was second with 12. The Maroons threatened early in the second half when Jack Fons scored 2 field goals and Ed Nelson one to come within a point of the Badgers at 28-27. Strain then hit from the floor, and the Badgers pulled away to a 42-34 lead with only 3 minutes to go. Syracuse, New York, January 20th. Syracuse and Notre Dame maintained their reputation for basketball thrillers tonight as the Irish won a 54-49 overtime contest before a capacity crowd of 3,000. It was the third extra period game in the last 4 played here between the two teams. Art Pope, Notre Dame sub, tied the count at 46-46 in the final 8 seconds of regulation time. The score moved to 49-49 in the extra period. Then the Irish went in front on 2 successive foul tosses by Larry Ryan and another gift throw by Cy Singer. The Orange gambled and Charles Butler tossed in a basket to clinch the game for Notre Dame. It was a rough game with each team losing 3 regulars on personals. Ann Arbor, Michigan, January 20th. Michigan's basketball team broke loose tonight to overwhelm Minnesota 41-24 and win its first victory in 5 starts in the Big Ten race. The loss was the second for the Gophers in 4 games. For the first time this season, Michigan met a team its own height and produced a second-half spurt, which made the triumph a certainty. After guard George Rule had led the first half attack, which gave the Wolverines an 18-15 lead forward, Mike Sofiak was the main cog in the offensive in the last period as he and his mates rolled up 23 points to the Gophers' 9. Rule led in total scoring with 10 points while Sofiak made 9. Minnesota managed to stay close in the opening half and the score was tied at 4, 7, 11, and 14. Captain Herb Brogan and Jim Mandler scored field goals in the final minutes, however, to give Michigan the halftime advantage. Michigan opened the second half with 6 fast points, however, and the Gophers were outdistanced. Minnesota went without a field goal until 18 minutes had elapsed. Iowa City, Iowa, January 20th. Northwestern's Wildcats remain mired at the bottom of the Big Ten tonight, losing to Iowa's once-beaten Hawkeyes 52-41 before 8,200. The Wildcats gained an 11-1 advantage before Iowa could find the range, but then Milt Kuhl, Iowa center, dropped in 9 points in less than 8 minutes, and Rudy Soderquist and Paul Siglin, guards, added 4 more to put the Hawkeyes ahead midway in the period. The lead switched hands 4 times before Iowa on baskets by captain Vic Siegel, and Ben Trickey, forwards, took command and boosted its total to 28-22 at halftime. Northwestern didn't threaten in the final period. Reserve center Clarence Haase paced the Wildcat attack with 7 points, most of them garnered in the closing minutes. Soderquist and Kuhl held top scoring honors with 13 and 12 points, respectively. It was Iowa's first Big Ten game at home and its second victory. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, January 20th. The Blue Demons of DePaul University of Chicago, scoring 10 points in an extra period, smashed aside Quinn's basketball team 45-36 the night before a crowd of 5,216. After leading all the way except for the opening minute of play and widening their edge as much as 11 points midway in the final half, DePaul was caught in the last second of regulation time by a desperate one-handed field goal from far out in the court by Mo Becker, brilliant Quinn's performer, which tied the score at 35-35. Becker scored 22 points to lead both teams. When the Chicago Bruins play the league-leading Oshkosh All-Stars in the 132nd Regiment Armory tomorrow night, they will share fans' attention with the undefeated Burton-Dixies and Pepsi-Cola teams of the Windy City League, who meet in the opener at 7:45 p.m. Followers of the Burton-Dixie Quintet have taken a block of 500 tickets to cheer their team to victory against the Pepsi-Colas. The latter club, coached by Eddie Kolar, includes 4 members of the strong Morton High School team of last year. Bruin followers will watch Wibbs Coutts, who is making a bid for scoring honors in the National Basketball League. Coutts had scored 127 points in 11 games and is second to Ben Stephens, the leader who has played 4 games more than Chicago's sharpshooter. Interesting, too, will be the battle between Leroy Cowboy Edwards, individual scoring leader for the last 3 years, and Mike Novak, Chicago's star center. The latter will seek to start another string of consecutive scoring games. At Detroit last Friday, Novak was held scoreless for the first time in 39 National League contests. Edwards was injured the early part of the season and is just returning to the form which made him a standout player since playing at the University of Kentucky 4 years ago. An idea of the playing strength of the Oshkosh Quintet can be gleaned from the fact that the team has won 9 and lost 1, despite the fact that Edwards was used sparingly until the last 2 games. James T. Gallagher, general manager of the Cubs yesterday, was able to sit in on the annual directors meeting and club election without any interruptions from the mailman. While he was voting for P.K. Wrigley as president, Charles Boots Weber as vice president, Margaret Donahue as secretary, and Bill Veck Jr. as treasurer, Mr. G couldn't resist eyeing the door for a man dressed like a Confederate soldier, but all the man in gray brought was direct mail advertising of a couple of florist concerns and a week's edition of the Catalina Islander, no player contracts or even player squawks. Even the fact that the executive committee officially agreed that PK knew what he was doing last November when he made Mr. Gallagher general manager failed to get Jim's mind off the mailman's load or lack of same. Not that Mr. G is in any panic. He knows that contract balkers bloom mostly in January and February and wilt in the splash of signature ink in a few days before March 1st. Just the same, there are 20 Cubs who haven't signed, and that's quite a load of anxiety for a new general manager, even if he knows the routine of such matters through the years of journalistic observation, such as Mr. G has experienced. Though the Cub mail brought naught of news of recalcitrance, a news dispatch from Tucson brought a bulletin of last year's most stubborn signer, Hank Lieber. Last year, Hank missed the training span on Catalina and wasn't signed until Gabby Hartnett took over the special assignment of contacting Hank after the latter had been discovered living incognito in a hotel 3 blocks from the Cubs' Los Angeles headquarters after they had returned to the mainland. Hank and his bride yesterday returned to Mrs. Lieber's Tucson hotel after their honeymoon. Hank took occasion to remark that he had returned his contract unsigned, which wasn't as startling as the revelation that he weighs 225 pounds. He is listed in the new Cub roster at 197 pounds. If Hank is figuring on missing the 3 weeks exercise period on Catalina Island this year, the matter is indeed serious, for 28 extra pounds on an outfielder are a lot of pounds. Moreover, the new Mrs. Lieber's papa is a hotel owner, and we can testify through experience that he sets a gorgeous table which isn't exactly designed to whittle off blubber. Lieber said in connection with the return of his contract that he thought he was entitled to a raise. He added, but there really isn't such a thing as a holdout. When a player and his club don't agree on salary, they are only trying to agree on terms. The Cubs have not chosen to reveal the status of negotiations with the 20 unsigned players, but it is known that 3 have formally rejected offers. They are Lieber, Charlie Root, who dashed here from California last week without effecting an agreement, and catcher Clyde McCullough, who says he wants $1,000 more than the $6,500 said to have been offered him. Billy Herman, the second baseman, and Augie Gallant, outfielder, suffered fracture of both kneecaps last summer when he ran into the wall at Shibe Park, Philadelphia, have indicated they are not satisfied with the terms offered. Though 17 Cubs have been signed, there aren't enough in the fold to start a ball game without using battery men in the infield and outfield. The only outfielders signed are Dom D'Alessandro and rookie Barney Olson. Bill Myers is the only infielder on the line who is figured among the 1941 regulars. The pitching staff is in good shape, however. Claude Passau and Larry French have signed. 3 Chicago radio stations will broadcast the Cubs games in 1941. Contracts were signed yesterday by the club's directorate with WGN, WCFL, and WJJD. 4 stations aired the games last season. Des Moines, Iowa, January 20th. Bob Feller left here tonight by plane for Cleveland, Ohio, where he is scheduled to confer tomorrow with Indian officials concerning his 1941 contract. Feller said he expects a boost over last year when he led the American League in victories with 27. New York, January 20th. If anyone still has even a vague idea that Bucky Walters is just a journeyman thrower equipped with horseshoes and not a super deluxe model baseball pitcher, a few figures on the 1940 National League mound performances might painlessly remove it. They show that for the second straight year that the one-time third baseman led the league not only in earned run average, but also in the usually overlooked opponent's batting average. The 1940 batting average of Bucky's combined opposition, as compiled by Tommy Holmes, a Brooklyn baseball writer, was .220, the exact percentage of the previous year. The opponent's batting average figures, this is going to be a lot of figures if anyone wants to turn back now, present some intriguing comparisons. For instance, Kirby Higbee, the Phillies pitcher who has graduated to the Brooklyn Dodgers this winter with a $100,000 degree, ranked 17th in earned run average, yet he was number 2 in opponent's batting average with a .231 mark. That would indicate a pitcher's value is based more on the opponent's batting average than on earned runs, for Higbee was much in demand and brought a fancy sum which would seem out of keeping with his number 17 ranking in the earned run department. Walks, some extra base hits, and slower fielding might boost an earned run average more than a little. Number 3 in opponent's average and number 4 in earned runs might surprise. He's plump, jovial Freddie Fitzsimmons, who will be 40 years old next July. Fat Freddie wasn't even in the first 18 finishers in 1940, yet he held the opposition to a 232.6 average. New names sprinkled the list of leaders and opponents' batting average for 1940, with some of the 1939 headliners dropping practically out of sight. The newcomers include Junior Thompson, fourth with a mark of 233.1, Rip Sewell, 6th with 238, Manuel Salvo, 8th with 248, and Hal Schumacher, 9th with 251. Claude Passau held steady in 5th place at 237, and Harry Gumbert remained 10th at 252. Lou Fett, 2nd in 1939 at 233, dropped out of sight last year. Carl Hubble fell from 3rd to 16th. Luke Hamlin dropped from 4th out of sight. Hugh Casey dropped from 6th to an unrated class. Bill Possadell dropped from 7th to 23rd. Larry French from 8th to 12th. Hugh Mulcahy from 9th to 17th. Walter's running mate Paul Derringer jumped from 13th to 7th, cutting out his opponent's batting average from 272.5 to 246. Ashland, Wisconsin, January 20th. The 7th District Board of Appeals here rejected an application by Morris Arnovich of Superior, recently sold by Cincinnati to the New York Giants, for deferment from the United States Army service under the Selective Service Act. It was learned today. Indications are that Arnovich will be called for a year's training, possibly before June 1st. The lottery gave Arnovich's number 153, which is 212 in the national list. The board's decision found Arnovich in the midst of plans to depart for Hot Springs, Arkansas, where he usually spends several weeks before joining teammates in training camp. Ann Arbor, Michigan, January 20th. Tom Harmon, Michigan's great halfback, was presented the Chicago Tribune Silver Football Trophy before 2,500 fans in Yost Fieldhouse tonight by Wilfred Smith, Tribune football writer. Harmon is the third Michigan man to win the award, which goes annually to the most valuable player in the Western Conference. In response to Smith's brief tribute, Harmon expressed his deep appreciation. "This moment is perhaps the happiest in my life," he said. "It is certainly the greatest thrill in 3 years of football to be elected most valuable of your own teammates. You can appreciate this award only if you have played with the great bunch of fellows who played football for Michigan this year. I will treasure this trophy always with all my heart, and I hope somebody else under Coach Fritz Chrysler will receive it again soon." The presentation was made between halves of the Michigan-Minnesota basketball game. And that is sports, and that is news as read from the Chicago Tribune. Henry Chopp reporting for January 21st, 1941. Have a swell day.